In over 6 years and 350 different interviews on this podcast, myself, Lewis, and my co host, Joseph, have always asked our guests the same question: what makes life worth living? We ask this question to anybody that comes on the show, regardless of the field they're in or the background they have, from Hollywood superstars to psychologists to you name it, musicians, historians. We always ask the same question. Now, we've been lucky enough on this show to receive some amazing answers to this question that not only have shaped my outlook on life, but I know a lot of you guys as well. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing answers from guests like the fantastic writer that is Robert Greene, Douglas Murray, Bret Weinstein, Tammy Peterson, and the existential psychiatrist Irvin Yalom, that to this day remains a fan favorite episode. So enjoy this compilation of what makes a life worth living. And we'll start off with the answer from the great Robert Greene.
Well, um, it doesn't have to be this vast thing where you have to be Albert Einstein or you have to accomplish something absolutely fantastic in your life. You don't want to set the bar too high so that you're going to be disappointed. But the sense that you realized some of your potential, that when you were go back to when you were 5 years old, maybe give or take a year. You had these dreams, right? You were going to be the best football player on the planet, right? You were going to be Prime Minister of England or whatever, or you were going to be the next Sean Connery. That's more appropriate, um, or whatever. Um, I remember back when I was following football, there was a very, very successful Welsh football player who played in Spain where I lived. Can't remember his name. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. It'll come to me. Anyway, so you had these dreams, right? And the feeling is that you get distance from them and that you begin to accept that I can only do this much, or I'm just going to be, I'm just going to be working at Burger King my whole life, or I'm going to be delivering things. There's nothing wrong with having to take those kind of jobs. And believe me, I've had plenty of them before I wrote my books. But you want to have a sense of direction. You want to be able to think that that child part of you isn't dead, that the dreams that you had are still alive, that you still can connect to that person who you were when you were 5 and 6. And if they were looking at you now as you're older, they wouldn't go, God damn, that's not what I thought I would be, right? You want a sense of slightly living up to it. Of course, some of those dreams were a bit grandiose, but to the sense of I'm realizing my potential. I'm doing some of the things that I've always wanted to do. What makes me different, what makes me unique. I'm willing to take some risks. And the sense that you're moving in that direction is enough to give you a sense of fulfillment. So let's say you're trapped at some shit job. And as I said, I've been in those myself prior to the 48 Laws of Power. My girlfriend and I counted like 50, 60 different jobs that I had, and most of them were pretty crappy. So let's say you're at a crap job, and life feels like it's a dead end and it's never going anywhere. Okay, that's like pretty depressing, and that'll drive you to whatever habits that you're going to have. Well, okay, let's say I have an idea. I've always wanted to get into this field. I always wanted to be a writer. I always wanted to be in music, and I can't continue on just going paycheck to paycheck. I'm not going to quit my job, but I'm going to have a plan. I'm going to say, I'm going to start I'm going to go back to school at night. I'm going to start developing a skill in this new area. And in a year, I'm going to try and segue from this shit job into something that excites me more. And I'm going to study hard and try and get there. If you could just make that one mental step, already you're going to have you're going to feel so much better about yourself just mentally if you have a plan of how to get out of this trap. And you have to realize that time can go by very quickly. It goes back much faster than you think. And when you're 20 or 30, you think you've got all this time in the world, but you don't. You know, it's pretty relentless. So having a sense of a plan, concrete actions that you can take to get out of that, this will automatically enrich you and give you a momentary, in the moment, a sense of fulfillment that you'll end up becoming much greater as you go further along.
What makes a life worth living?
Very good question. What a good way to end. A lot of things, I think. I think the most obvious one is to have meaningful relationships with people you love. Um, to find around you relationships of depth with your family, your loved ones, your partners, your friends. Not to chase ephemeral and shallow relationships, but deep ones. And that requires work. It requires time, commitment, and much more. But it'll reward you far more than however many thousands of likes you get on Instagram from total strangers who won't notice you when you're gone and didn't notice you much when you were here. I think it is to immerse yourself in your time, but not to be a creature of your time. There's a quote of Schiller I'm very fond of. He said, "Be a part of your century, but do not be its creature." Reach for truth, and know that it's not a game, that it's not something you do for its own sake, but because it'll get you somewhere. Search for meaning, not because the search is the point, but because there is meaning, and that you should try to find it. Make sure that by the end of your life, you are wiser and know more than you did at the start. Don't find yourself in that pitiful situation of not knowing what you did or what it was about. Try to find your place in the universe and try to find some peace with it. Search for the big questions and immerse yourself in them. If you don't believe in God, try to work your way towards the things that are God-shaped. And don't waste your time. That isn't to say, by the way, that you spend your entire life, or we should spend our entire life, involved only in the deep questions. But don't skip them. Don't spend all your time on Instagram and ignore the unbelievable wealth of knowledge and human wisdom and beauty that has been given to us and which we've inherited from amazing men and women who've gone before us. We have an extraordinary opportunity in this generation. We have access to all the world's music for free. We have access to almost all the world's literature almost for free. And that's not a small thing. I would always say, as somebody who's deeply immersed in the arts, that one of the purposes of the arts is not just to distract us in some way, but that it points us towards truth. So read, listen, study, and live as much as you can, as fulsomely as you can. And that would be a life well lived, or at least the start of finding your way to that.
Yeah, it's comparatively straightforward. If I look at all of the resources that will be spent on me, things that will never be recovered, that's an amount of debt. And I strive to be in surplus. That is to say, to return more to the world than the cost that is implied by my existence. And when I reach people, when I increase the amount that they can understand about what they see, about what life means, about why it's difficult in certain ways, if I improve their lives it eats away at that debt, and life will have been worth living if I end up in surplus, having created more well-being than I have burned up.
I think the answer to that, for most people, and I stress most people, is their children and grandchildren. We're very, very motivated as a species by our immediate offspring and their welfare, their flourishing. Of course, not everybody has children, and not every family is happy, but that's a very big part of the answer, and it certainly is for me. Beyond that, I think one cannot really feel that life is worth living until one has a meaningful connection to both the dead, the past, and the unborn, the future generations we will never meet. This was Edmund Burke's great insight and reflections on the revolution in France, that the real social contract has been between the living, the dead, and the unborn. A culture that does not make you feel an intense connection to both the dead and the unborn is a culture that fundamentally undervalues humanity. We as as individuals we're like mayflies. We have a relatively short lifespan in the great scheme of things. That life cannot be meaningful if it is entirely focused on our own gratification, our own accumulation of wealth, or whatever it is. And even if all we do is look after ourselves and our kids, that's not enough. It's about the people we don't know, don't meet, the dead and the unborn. And history, the study of history, is one way that I find I can best commune, not only with those vanished generations. The great majority of human beings are dead, after all, whoever lived. It's only about 7% who are currently alive. But also history gives one a sense of what posterity might possibly think about us. I mean, who in 100 years will be writing the history? I don't know. Maybe there'll be no history. But if there is history to be written in 100 years or 200 years or 300 years, it's important for us to ask ourselves right now, what will they say? And are we acting in a way that will get us good or bad press when those future histories come to be written?
Well, for 24 hours, so for a day, if I have been helpful in any way, one way, every day, that makes life worth living. And it usually, the thing is, it's not just that you've helped someone, and maybe you've also helped yourself to be a better person in a day. That kind of striving for more understanding and more clarity, that's what makes life worth living, as far as I'm concerned.
What does matter in the end, I think, is a well-lived life. I'm going to be repeating myself, but it's a well-lived life where I can speak for myself. I have very little death anxiety at this point. I feel pleased with myself. I think that I really had that happen when I started looking at my own writing. And I said, I had a bad early start in my life. The first 14 years were awful for me, but I think I've overcome that. I'm proud of what I've done. I don't think I have any unused talents and abilities. I'm very concerned about the people who are close to me with my 4 children, and I do whatever I can. I'm very proud of them and the kind of people they've become. So that means a tremendous amount for me.
Thank you for tuning in to another video of ours and supporting the channel. The #1 way you can support the show is by hitting the subscribe button right here on YouTube. It really helps us out. Or go and check us out on any of your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you name it, we're on it. So if you head over there, drop us a 5-star review, follow the show. But ultimately, here on YouTube is the #1 place to get us. So thank you so much for the support, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Freedom Pact podcast.